Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that some stories and discussions in this episode of Radiant Resilience may touch on sensitive and potentially triggering topics. These may include themes of discussions about immigration challenges and legal struggles, brief mentions of anxiety and stress related to legal status, mention of family separation due to immigration, discussion about financial and emotional difficulties in navigating the immigration process. Our goal is to share real-life experiences in a respectful and empathetic manner, offering insights into the complexities of the human spirit and the journey towards resilience. However, we understand that some content might be difficult for listeners. We encourage you to prioritize your well-being and discretion when deciding to listen. Please remember this podcast is not a substitute for professional advice or support. If you find yourself needing assistance, we urge you to seek help from qualified professionals or trusted support systems. Your mental and emotional health is important to us. Thank you for your courage and for joining us in a space of understanding and compassion. Welcome back, everyone, to Radiant Resilience. I'm so excited today because I have a friend from high school with me today. Cookie, is it Jihei? Is that how you say it?
Exactly.
Jihei Larson. We went to high school together. We were cheerleaders together. I actually was just going through my yearbook with Colin the other day, and that was fun. I found a whole bunch of fun pictures of us all. But a little bit about Cookie. She was born in South Korea, moved with her parents to the States when she was almost 3 years old, grew up in New York City, moved to Colorado at 12. She's been living and loving the Colorado way of life, found her love for the mountains too strong to ever move away. She got her degree from the University of Colorado, fought to stay in this country, which is what we're going to talk about. It's a fascinating story. It's the only place she's ever known as home. And then she met her husband and now has 2 kids. So welcome, Cookie. Thanks so much for coming on and having this conversation. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me. I'm pretty excited.
Yeah, this is a really fascinating story. So I did Cookie's hair, I don't know, a few years ago now, but she shared this story with me for the first time then. And I just thought it was so interesting to learn about this aspect because we hear about it in the news and it's talked about in politics, and yet to know somebody and put a face to someone that's going through this is super interesting, because I think everybody also has the perspective that getting into this country is an easy thing to do, and it's not at all. So why don't you start wherever you would like to start, my dear?
Sure. So just like you mentioned, I was born in South Korea, and what happened was my parents wanted to always give us a better life, the American dream. That's what
Yeah.
everybody thinks about. And so granted, both my parents did grow up more in poverty than anything, if you hear some of the crazy stories from my parents.
From
And
their
so,
childhoods.
from their childhood, so they
Mhm.
always wanted to give me, because I was their only child when they had me at the time, a better life. And so that meant trying to go for the quote unquote American dream. And I think my mom was actually the first to dream to want to come to this country. But in order for that to happen, a lot of things have to be in place. So they sent my dad off here to the US first to start a life for us. And my dad came when I was only a few months old, I believe. I don't have the exact timelines of like
Yeah.
dates for this because obviously I was an infant. And
Yeah,
then
sure.
me and my mom came when I was closer to 3 years old. So like about two and some change. So I didn't even really know my dad until I was a toddler because he was here
Oh,
getting a job, getting an apartment, getting things situated so me and my mom could come over afterward. And granted, my parents had just about nothing when they came to the States. So
wow.
when you really hear those stories about people coming over with nothing, they literally probably only had a couple $100s in their pockets. And it
Wow.
was like that big chance that they were taking. And so both my parents actually came into the country legally because they came by getting work visas.
Hmm.
So when you get like a work visa in the US, it's only for a certain amount of time usually. And there's so many different kinds of work visas. And I can't remember what both of my parents had two different kinds of work visas.
Okay.
I don't exactly know the technicalities of what kind that they had. I just know they were both working visas. And then they were only for a certain amount of time. So if you do that, you get like a social security number or a tax ID number or something. So you can know, obviously, you're working in the United States, you have to pay taxes, you have to
Right.
live like an American citizen. And then after your stint is over, you either can be either, I don't know if you can renew or something, or you have to go back. I know most of them you have to go back to your country, or I don't know if like certain jobs like my job, they can sponsor you to stay.
Yes.
That actually happens a lot in the US is
Yeah.
if you get sponsored by a company, you can stay. But granted, my parents weren't working for any kind of big company. There were more
Right.
labor intensive jobs for both of my parents. So
Which is what a lot of immigrants come here and start off
right,
at least
right.
doing is the hard labor jobs that a lot of Americans don't want to do.
Exactly. And I will tell you for a fact, I get my work ethic from both my parents.
Mhm. Which is
um,
amazing, by the way. I have to tell you, Cookie and I have stayed in touch a little bit since high school, but like just watching her journey. And what do you do for a living? Why don't you share that?
so I do the layman's term for what I do is I work in a laboratory and I work for a lab called Clinimmune. I'm a part of the University of Colorado School of Medicine, and we're the laboratory that does all the testing for transplant patients.
Oh, wow.
So whether you're thinking bone marrow, like stem cell transplants, or we're doing like heart, kidney, lungs, pancreas, liver, like solid organ, think of me always going in and doing like little mini transplants and test tubes with donors and recipients, and we're monitoring our transplant candidates, things like that. So I work in the laboratory and I
Mhm.
absolutely love what I do. I've been with my company for 13 years now. So I've gone through a lot of different mediums. Like used to work in the stem cell lab and now I work in the serology lab, but histocompatibility lab. And I absolutely love what I do. And I feel like there's a lot of meaning behind what we do. So I've never really thought about leaving the
Yeah.
industry because although I didn't go to school for this, it's something that I found later on in life. There's a part where every day you go into work and it's bittersweet. Somebody might have lost their life, but then seven other people have new life.
Mm.
So it's very meaningful. And I feel like you have to have that in order to love what you do. And I truly do love what I do. And I love the people that I work with. And it's really fun atmosphere. So yeah.
What did you major in?
I have a degree in international business.
Okay. It's not even medical related.
No, I have had to work my butt off to get the necessary science credits that I need through the university, to studying for exams for different certifications and things like that, just to be able to do what I like to do.
Yeah.
Because it's
Well,
definitely not what I have a degree in.
yeah. Yeah. But all that to say that you work really hard, you're really smart, you are a good contributing member to this society, and you said you got that from your parents.
And they were great examples growing up because I kid you not, my parents probably worked 7 days a week. It
Oh,
was
yeah.
insane. And they worked multiple jobs. They weren't just working one job. And they were
Mm-hmm.
working far away too. I remember we lived in New York City. We moved all the time too because it would be cheaper down the street or whatever. But my dad literally worked day in and day out. And then my mother was like driving from like New York City all the way to like Connecticut and like working in Connecticut. And then they literally made it
Mm-hmm.
in the US. They did everything they can to make it in the
Yeah.
US. And that's the other thing about my parents is their visa was only for a certain amount of time. But what happened was, and the reason I got into the predicament that I was in as an undocumented immigrant was because I was so young that I came over on my mom's visa with her to the
Okay.
US. But the problem is my parents never left.
Mm-hmm.
They let their visas lapse.
Mm-hmm.
And in turn, that made it so they were undocumented. I was undocumented. And my brother wasn't born at this time yet because my brother and I have a 6 year age difference. So my brother was the only person actually in our family that was a natural born citizen because he was born in the US.
Okay.
He was the only one that didn't have an issue
Oh,
out of,
wow.
yeah, with
Yeah.
all of this. But what I didn't know is I didn't even know this was a thing, to be completely honest. Because like when you go through grade school or middle school or high school, like who talks about citizenship? Like you just assume.
Nobody's in the lunchroom being like, hey, what's your social security number?
So I didn't even know this was like a thing in my whole life until I was in high school and I was trying to apply for a job at a very well-known fast food establishment. And just because all my friends worked there, so I wanted to work there. And I thought it'd be so cool to have a job and make your own money. And back when minimum wage was 5.15 an hour.
Yeah, I remember those days. I was working at a restaurant in town that was I really think it was like $5 or $6 an hour, and then
Mhm.
whatever tips that I made because I was like a hostess and
And so I wanted to work and have a little extra spending money to hang out with my friends because I'm in high school.
sure, yeah.
And so I went and I talked to the guy at the place, and he was like, just fill out this application. And he already knew me because I already hung out with all my friends there all the time.
Oh yeah.
And he's, yeah, you can work here. Why not? Like, we can always use help. So he gave me an application and I took it home to like fill it out. And I go by Cookie, but I didn't even realize this was like a legal document. So like I put Cookie and stuff when I was like doing my application. I remember this, but then I was like, oh, I should, like, my mom's have to put like your real name, like Chihe. Kim was my real name. And so you have
I
to
never
do
knew
your,
that.
yeah, so you have to do your legal name because this is for work. So I didn't even think about that, like growing up. And then you're learning a lot during this time. And then there was a part where it said fill out your social security number. And I told my mom, I was like, what is this? And she's, oh, you don't have one of those.
Oh wow.
And I was like, what is it? She's like, you can't work. My mom actually explained, she's like, you can't work because you don't have one of those. And I was like, what is it? I had to learn about that because I had never needed my social security
Wow.
number my whole entire life. You're in high school. Like, when have you needed your social security number? Think about it.
Yeah, for sure. But I feel like I still knew that I had one because we had the little cards and I
I
don't
didn't
know,
even know what that
but
was.
that's fair. I'm trying to look back on the first job applications I applied for.
Right.
And yeah, I'm like, Mom, help me.
Exactly. And that's exactly what happened. And that's where I was actually told by my mother, you can't get this job. You can't work. And I was like, what do you mean you can't work? All my friends work. Like, and she, you need this number to work. And then that's when I got into the whole thing of, you need this number so you can pay taxes. And I'm like, I don't even know what all this is. Like,
Again, it's you're like 16 years old being like, what are
what's taxes? What a social security number is. And it's because I had
yeah,
never needed it my entire life. I guess it was weird putting a lot of things together now, hindsight, looking back. I
sure.
was like, oh, that's why this was like this, or et cetera, because I never knew back then why things were the
Yeah.
way they were. And so then I went back to the establishment and I was like, hey, I filled out my application, but I don't have a social security number. And they were just like, I'm sure we can figure it out. That's also illegal. I actually have no
Yeah.
idea how they figured it out. If I think, I don't remember it because I'm sure at the time we figured it out a certain way, but I don't know now at this age how they even managed to do that. Because if you look at our legal
Mm.
system, like, you need to prove that you can work in the US to be able to do that. But I got paychecks and I got
Wow.
paid. So I have no idea what the workaround was. And again, I was like 16 years old. So like, I don't know.
Wow.
But he made it happen. But I worked my butt off for that establishment all the way till college. It actually put me through my first
Oh.
year or two in college. So
Oh
even when
wow.
I, yeah, lived in Denver, I was driving back every weekend and working like 40 hours and then going back to school Monday through Thursday and then
Oh.
doing it again. Yeah. And so I legit got paychecks. Now, how that was made to be, I have no idea. So I
Hmm.
can't answer questions on that. But again, I didn't really have anything much to do with that either. But
Yeah.
if you look at these kind of stories about immigration, this is why people get so upset, is because they're like how they don't want undocumented immigrants in the US because they're taking probably like, people think they take jobs away from other Americans, and two, like, they're not paying taxes. But I can tell you, on my paychecks, they were taking all them taxes because your paycheck's very small. When you're making 5.15 an
Yeah.
hour, it's 4.70 or something, or $4 an hour after taxes. So I can tell
Yeah.
you taxes were being taken out, but I have no idea because I don't have a social security number
Yeah.
at the time. And so obviously I didn't question it. I was 16, but I worked my butt off for them until I was in college. And then finally, like, I stopped working for them. And you'll listen as more of the story goes on why I stopped working for them, because I started getting my papers and etc. But so that was like the whole thing. But that's how I also found out, like, the reason why I didn't have what I have was because my parents let their visas lapse. And
So they
what,
had to sit you down and have that conversation with you too.
yeah, it was mostly my mom because at the time my dad wasn't there with us, and my mother like had to like sit down and explain a lot of these things. But you got to think, if you're, even if they didn't have the proper paperwork to stay in the country, they had proper paperwork to work in the country. Because remember, they came on working a working visa, so
Yeah.
they literally paid taxes the
Okay.
entire time that they lived in the US. And my mom still lives here. My dad actually lives back in Korea. and he has been since I graduated college in 2009. But he was here in this country for decades. And
Yeah, how do you know how long their initial visas were?
I honestly, it could have been 6 months or it could have been in a year. Like, I actually
Yeah.
have no idea. Yeah. But they let it lapse. But because they never stopped living like a lawful citizen, like in the fact they were just undocumented
Mm,
to be here, but they still worked, paid taxes every year. Like, they were law abiding citizens. Nobody ever questioned it.
yeah, yeah.
So, yeah.
They were still
And
giving their money to the government, so
exactly. And so for me, then I found like my world was just at a whirlwind when I found all this out. And that
gosh, I can
actually
only
makes sense
imagine.
too, because I didn't have insurance, medical insurance. My mom had no medical insurance.
Okay.
But that's something I didn't know, because when we were in high school, we had to go get physicals and stuff for sports and whatever. I went to the chiropractor down the street and they did my physical and I turned in my paperwork. But then even in cheer, when I broke my finger, like, I didn't go to the ER or urgent care. Like, my mom threw a couple popsicle sticks in between my fingers and wrapped it. Like, there was things that happened, but I never went to the doctor, or I didn't go to the dentist for a really long time. But I never realized these things all play a part in you being able to live in this country freely.
Yeah. So they still had their limitations, even
But
though
I
they
didn't know
did
that.
have, yeah, sure. That's just so interesting to look back on. And to learn all of that at 16 years old, that had to be a lot to take in.
Yeah. And I didn't even put all these things together, like the whole thing about, oh, me going get physicals, or when I broke my finger, how we handle that, or even when I broke my nose, like I like how we handle that, stuff like that. I didn't even think about that till after I was in my 20s. I was like, that makes so much sense why I never went to the doctor, because we didn't have medical insurance.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
another thing that a lot of people talk about is that undocumented people somehow have health insurance, but maybe they're just doing that where they're finding other methods to take care of things, or you can always pay out of pocket too if you
Right.
have the money.
But my mom
So,
was essentially like one income. And when we were
yeah.
living in Colorado, we were living in like low income housing in Colorado while I went to high school. Yeah, I can't even imagine like trying to take care of me and my brother and my mom, because essentially she was a single mom when I was in high school. And I can't imagine being in her shoes, like undocumented, doing everything she needs to do to make money, like, but you have no health care. I have kids now and I think about it and I'm like, holy crap, like, how did she make it?
Yeah, and there's a lot of immigrant stories like that for sure. Fascinating and so inspirational to see that they made something of themselves and their kids made something of themselves. And
Your parents' love goes a long way, because also when you think about this, like I said, as a parent now, I look back at it and I'm very astounded, because I can't imagine like not having healthcare for my kids, or
Mhm.
not just being able to willy-nilly go to the doctor for
Yeah,
something. Like, I'm just lucky, I guess, in our family, like no one really got sick. No one
yeah,
got in big accidents, because then all of this would unravel. Because that's
yeah,
actually what happens to a lot of immigrants. Was a lot of people think too politically, oh, immigrants are like they don't pay for healthcare, whatever. Because there is emergency situations where people do have to go to the hospital, and obviously the hospital has to eat the costs on some of those things, when you are undocumented or you have no way to pay, or if you don't exist in this country. And that does happen. That's just in human nature.
I
Um,
will also say that happens to people that are Americans too, because they
right.
just can't afford our healthcare system, which,
Or if you're homeless, that's going to be
Mhm.
the exact same thing. If you're American born citizen, but if you're homeless and you have no access to healthcare, but you get in a big accident or something and someone has to take you to the ER, it's going to be the exact same thing.
Yeah,
You need to help people. Like,
yeah, yeah,
so,
yeah.
but in turn, I don't know if you've ever heard of what the DREAM Act is.
Mm,
This is how I also learned, because I was an undocumented immigrant because of my parents coming
right.
over at such a young age. I am what's called a dreamer. And so a dreamer, if you define dreamer, it's an undocumented immigrant who arrived to the United States as children. So this is like the biggest part of this act, is as children, not as an adult. You were brought over here by your parents and they attended school here. They identify as American. So I would be what's called a dreamer in
Hmm.
this situation. And in the US, there was actually something called a DREAM Act. And obviously, I don't want to go into a lot of politics by
Sure.
any means, but this was actually a really big thing. And I think it starts with it. I wrote these notes on. Hold on. The DREAM Act, it stands for Development Relief and Education for Alien Minors. So that's actually
Okay.
what that stands for. And the DREAM Act was started, I believe, and Please don't quote me if this is incorrect for anybody listening.
Yeah.
Don't come at me because
Yeah.
I may not know all the logistics of all the political stuff because
Sure.
obviously I only follow it enough, but I'm not hardcore into crazy amount of politics. So it started, I believe, in 2001, if I remember, and it was like a proposed legislation that protected kids like me
Okay.
because it was out of our control.
100%. I remember when you first told me this story, you were like, America is my home. I don't know anything else. I don't know the language in Korea. I don't know the
Right.
culture in Korea. Like I grew up in America. I went to school here. All the things. So
And the
yeah.
reason why the Dream Act started was to protect people like me because we are vulnerable. So if we got deported and I went back to Korea, it would be a foreign country for me
Yeah.
because I didn't grow up there. I didn't go to school there. I read and write like a first grader, mind you, like Korean. Korean was my first language, by the way, but English is my main language because
Yeah.
obviously I live in the US. I'm married to an American,
Well, you moved here
like
at 3.
that's why I don't have
Yeah.
an accent. That's why people never would have think that I was an illegal immigrant because
Right.
I'm not the typical what you think in your head an illegal immigrant would be. I'm very American. And so because that's where I grew up. And the Dream Act was actually proposed and it's been brought back into legislation like a tons of times in different forms, like different revisions over and over, like anything in politics.
Sure.
And so it was to protect people that are vulnerable in this specific situation because I think there was like over 2 million kids in the US that this pertained to because they're like especially a lot of it has to do with people coming over the border from Mexico obviously, but it's
Mhm.
not their fault. They came over when they were like infants and then they grew up here.
Yeah.
Not their fault. So the Dream Act would create a process for which immigrants would be able to apply for conditional residency into the US because it wasn't their fault. And then, so this way you can't just get deported. And the
Right.
Dream Act is completely different than DACA, what a lot of people, I know that's always been on the news and everything like that when you listen to it. So leading up to what they do is they want to help you get conditional residency and then help you become a permanent resident. If you're like a law abiding good citizen, this is your home. Like they don't want to kick you out for something that's not your fault. And then they want to eventually make you a citizen.
Okay.
So so that's what the Dream Act was started with very good intentions, but obviously from both sides, one side is for it, the other side is not.
Sure.
It's politics,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And so
Yeah.
it's I have
That's a
no
whole other
control.
topic.
That's a
Yeah.
whole nother topic. And
Yeah.
I unfortunately don't have any say or pull in anything. Obviously, I can go and speak in Washington and whatever, but it doesn't do anything. Like I'm not the ones voting on it.
Yeah.
And but I know in the past 20 years, there's been like 20 plus different versions of the Dream Act since it's been introduced to Congress. I believe the last I heard, I want to say in like 2021 or 2022, the Dream Act didn't pass.
Mm,
It was just a few years ago. But like I said, there's been so many different revisions. I can't keep up with it anymore
yeah.
because it's not applicable to me anymore.
Yeah.
So, like I said, don't come at me if I don't have the facts 100%
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
But it's crazy to know that if the dream also too politically, like when people say like, oh, these people don't pay taxes, et cetera. Although my parents were paying taxes and I was paying taxes somehow. So the
Yeah.
government was still getting their money, but certain obviously undocumented immigrants aren't paying taxes. But I think they did say something like if these lawful citizens became citizens to the US, or not even citizens, but permanent residents or where they can work legally, it would bring in $3 to $4 trillion in more revenue into the US or something like that. It was some crazy number to boost our economy because now there's more people actually paying taxes. So
Yeah.
there's also a monetary reason why the Dream Act was started, but like anything in politics, there's always money behind
Sure.
it.
Always.
Always. So
Money and power.
exactly. So if they gained legal status, then those people would now be paying taxes into the economy
Right.
lawfully, and then it would just boost their economy. And it comes full circle.
Yeah.
It's for the better good, and it's actually for the good of everybody because those people that were not citizens, it wasn't their fault. So now they are citizens because it's the only country that they know. And then now the
Yeah.
US also, it works out in their favor because now it's boosting our economy. So really is full circle if it had passed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like I said, this is completely different than DACA because DACA doesn't promise you residency and
Okay.
citizenship
Okay.
in the end. But so it's crazy because in high school, there was a very beloved teacher at our high school, and I'm not going to name names, but I he found out about my situation in high school. And there was one other student, again, I'm not going to say names, that was in
Yeah.
the exact same boat as me.
Wow.
Yes. So where we went to high school, there was two of us in the
Okay.
exact same situation. But it's crazy that we even like somehow figured this out. And then our teacher found out and had actually taken me and that other student. Um, and it's so crazy. I don't even know how we even came up to this topic, but the like when of conversation, I think we were like at a track meet or something, and we were just
Yeah.
like talking about something randomly, and it was like, you too, me too. Wait, crazy. And then obviously, like we were talking about it, but the reason the teacher found out was because I was a straight A student. I took all AP classes. I had like a 4.6 GPA senior
I
year with
remember you
all
being very
like
smart.
it's not smart, hardworking. And so
That's true. I
I
didn't put any work into school, high school. So.
it wasn't it's not smart. It's just really hardworking. And but I like I said, I got my work ethic from my parents and I try to put in a effort into everything I do, no
Mm,
matter what. And so what happened was that teacher had asked both me and this other student in conversation, like, hey, what are your plans after high school? Because, we're about to graduate and all these people are signing with colleges or going to do sports or whatever. And I was not doing that. And I actually hadn't even
oh.
applied
Oh,
and
really?
anywhere because that's a whole nother thing. You can't go to school.
I was
It's
going to ask that. I thought
yes,
that was a thing too. Like, how did you end up in
I
college?
and have a degree, I'll tell you in a little
Yeah.
bit. And I hadn't even applied anywhere at the time. And most people do early college applications like the first semester and then second semester. You already know where you're pretty much going to
Yeah.
go, right? Like before
Yeah.
graduation, before May. And it was spring semester. So it was like right at the beginning of spring around track season. And the teacher was like, what are you going to do? Because I was in his AP class. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I'll probably just work at my mom's nail salon or something because at the time my mom owned her own business. That's
Oh,
what's also
yeah.
crazy too. At this time, my mom has worked her butt off to own her own business. Yeah, and my mom does nails. And I was like, I don't know, maybe I'll just work at my mom's work or something like that and help her do nails. And mind you, I like never had done it in high school, but I was like, I don't have a lot of options here.
Yeah.
And so it's family business, right? It's
Yeah,
kind of
sure. I
whatever.
worked the pizzeria for 20 years after.
Exactly. So it's just
You
a
get
family
thrown
business.
into it.
So I'll
Yeah.
just help my mom out because she can definitely use the help.
Yeah.
And then he was like, you're gonna go do nails. You're a straight A student. You do sports, you do National Honor Society, you do volunteer work. You're not going to college. And I was like, I can't. And I explained the situation. Then
Mm.
he's, what? And he was like floored. He's because he didn't know that's why I didn't apply to school. And it was crazy because he cared so much. He took me and this other student to even go see this law firm, which was like, I think like at the time, the number one law firm back in like early 2000s for immigration here in Colorado.
Oh,
And
wow.
so he had actually made an appointment and took me and this other student to the law firm just to have a consultation, like a free consultation to talk to, is there anything that we can do?
Wow. That is
Right.
so kind.
So kind. So that's why when you say with teachers, like you look up to them, like they're big inspirations, like this person went out of their way
To change
to
your
do
life,
that,
basically.
at least to try,
Yeah. Yeah.
because they were like, that's unacceptable. I can't,
Yeah.
he couldn't accept the fact that I wasn't going to go to college and do all this stuff.
Mm.
And so he really went out of his way to do that. And I believe because this was so long ago, if I remember correctly, like, there was nothing at the time that could be done, unfortunately. And it was the Dream Act. That was the thing that everyone was like keeping their fingers crossed for, because if it had passed, then I can start my conditional residency and then really live my life just normally
Okay.
if I could do that. But the problem is it was still in the works, different
Okay.
revisions, and nothing had passed. So it was just honestly more talk about anything and no action, just a lot of
Okay.
talk. Okay. And it
Okay.
was things that were just proposed in the news at the time. And that was like my best bet based off this consultation that we had at this law firm.
Okay. And how old were you when you did that? You said that was senior
I was
year?
a senior. I was a senior in high school.
Okay.
So yeah, I
So,
was 17. Yeah, I was
and then you
17.
go, so you go to this lawyer and they basically say, we got to hope this thing's going to pass in order to help
Exactly.
you. And then how are you feeling about that?
I didn't even know that was an option at the time. That's where I actually heard about the Dream Act. I had
Okay.
no idea. So they're the ones who explained it to me and stuff. So I really didn't even know going into it. But then I felt like more hopeful because I was like, if this goes through, man, that'd be really good for me.
Yeah, for
And so,
sure.
but then because of this whole thing, I was like, you know what? Let me just try to apply to college. Because also at the time, I was dating somebody at the time when I was a senior. and he got accepted to Yale. So I was like, here my
Oh,
boyfriend is in high school going to Yale, and here I am, also a very good student, and
somebody who could probably get into Yale.
not doing anything. I was definitely, there was some jealousy factors into that. And I was like, really just, this sucks.
Yeah.
you
Oh,
know but I think I just always knew, especially from when I found out when I tried to apply for my first job, this is like the trajectory of where I was going to go with my life, because I didn't really have any other options. So I
mm,
didn't really think of anything of it, but because of this teacher, I did at least was like, you know what, screw it, let me just try to apply to college. And I still paid all those fees, the entrance fees,
okay.
the application fees, and everything. So I applied to a couple community colleges. I applied to CU Denver,
Okay.
and I I don't think I applied to Metro, but like any of the really close colleges around, because
Yeah.
obviously I can't afford to go to Stanford, Yale, like any of those like
Yeah.
Ivy League schools. And I definitely could tell you, even if I did get in, I couldn't afford out of state tuition, because that would
Mm,
just be absolutely outrageous. Like my mom made like almost no money and took care of us.
yeah.
We lived in low income housing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who's going to pay for it? And if you don't have a social security number, you can't get a loan.
Oh, oh my goodness.
So how am I going to go to school? You have
So
to pay
many
for it out of pocket.
things.
It's so many things. It comes full circle.
So
And so I
many.
had applied, and it was crazy because I actually didn't even get into Arapahoe Community College.
Oh.
Yeah, I just always knew that it was coming down the line that I was just going to get rejected because of
Ugh.
these factors. Because you actually have to have tax information, not necessarily a social security number, but at least some kind of tax social security number, tax ID, or some kind of legal thing that shows that you can do the tax part of it, like for school. Because with school, that is a lot of
Yeah.
financial aid, whether you take out loans, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera. But for some reason, and I have no idea how, and I always feel like things happen for a reason
Yeah.
in the universe, like some kind of stars lined up, and I got accepted to CU. And yeah, and it was like crazy because I didn't have every piece of paperwork that they required when you did the application, but they accepted me, and I said, you know what, let's
Just
try
roll
it.
with it.
Like, just roll with it. It's like how my parents have been living here their whole life. I'm a
Let's just
law-abiding
see what
citizen. Let's
happens.
just see what happens. And so I did the whole enrollment process, went through meeting your advisors, etc., like signing up for school, and I started school. The only problem was because I didn't have anything saying that I was like a citizen or a resident, because again, you can't prove that you're like a resident besides me living here, but like how are you going to prove it? You don't have a social security number.
Were
They
you able to get a driver's license?
No. So that's why I was the only person, see, going all through high school. I didn't drive. Everybody at 16 was getting their
Oh,
driver's licenses in high school. And it was so sad for me because I want to be responsible with the car, have a
yeah.
job, do all this stuff. There was no way. I always had to mooch off my friends to go get rides everywhere. And luckily, I had some amazing friends in high school because I lived my best life, Tawny, in high school.
Ah,
I was one of those people that cried when high school graduation happened because I had 10 different friend groups. It wasn't just one friend group. And then I had such a positive high school experience, that like tailgating and senior ditch day and stuff like that. Like I had such fun high school life that I was really sad for high school to end, actually, because it's like the only time where you're like not an adult.
yeah,
Like, yeah,
but you're like old enough to do a little bit more like adult like things. And I actually enjoyed high school as well. I did not have a negative experience. The end of my high school years were a bit tumultuous because my parents were getting divorced and all that
oh,
stuff. But
I heard that from your podcast. Yeah.
yeah, that was like the my senior year. But up until that point, I actually was very sad when your class graduated because
Colin was in our class.
just that, but I had so many friends in your guys' grade too. I think I had more in, so Cookie is a year older than me in school and went to school with Colin. They were in the same grade. And I just was like, I feel like I just lost all my friends.
Because you hung out with all of the 1 year older friends.
Yeah. And then my grade, and then I started beauty school my senior year. And so that took me away for half the day all the time. And so I lost a bunch of connections that year too. So that I don't really look fondly on my senior year as much, but everything leading up to
But your
it.
junior year, you had a
I
great
loved my
time.
junior year. That was so fun. That was a good year. We did good in cheer and competitions, and like the football
Exactly.
team did really good.
I know. So
Yeah.
I had a great positive high school experience, and I was really sad for it to be over, especially because I knew after this there'd be, who knew what was in store for me going, because most people just, even if you don't know what you want to major in college, or you don't know what you want to do when you grow up. People at least know they're going to go some direction in life, but I actually had I didn't even have a purpose because I didn't know what my purpose would be at that time, except just to survive here.
Was
And
that
so,
scary?
a little bit because you can't get an apartment. You
Mm,
can't, like, there's so many things that people don't think about.
yeah.
And so it's crazy because I did have a bank account, but it was under my parents. So I don't
Um,
think I needed my own documentation. It was like a parental like checking account
yeah.
under your parents. And but if you were just undocumented, you couldn't even get a bank account.
Yeah. That's wild.
So like,
So no
how do you
driver's
do
license, no bank account, no job, no school, no
how do you
loans, no
how do you live? No shelter.
no
You got to
health
think
insurance,
no health
no,
insurance.
oh
So
my
that's why it does
gosh.
make it really hard for undocumented immigrants to live in this country unless you're doing illegal things, which I
Mm,
wasn't. So I could have been driving without a driver's license, like a lot
right.
of people actually do in the US. And that's also one of the big gripes about undocumented immigrants, about not having auto insurance, not having,
Right.
but I didn't. I followed all the rules. Like I was so excited when the light rail came in down on Lincoln because I was riding the light rail every single day to school, but I didn't need a driver's license, like things like that. But for some kind of grace of God, CU Denver accepted me and I was like, all right, let's try it. And what was crazy was they were just like, yeah, just bring XYZ stuff. I had talked to the registrar's office, like just bring it in when you have time. But of course, I knew I didn't have it, so I just kept ignoring the request to bring those papers in. But also sucked because I couldn't prove like I was a permanent resident because I wasn't. And they had to charge me like out of country tuition, like a foreign exchange student kind of tuition. And it really
Oh,
sucked
wow.
because the first year, it was like 3 times the cost of the first semester, just going to school, just the first semester. And I remember it was crazy. I worked full time. My mom, like, one of her close friends gave us cash loan so I can go to school so we can pay them back because
Oh,
we're all
wow.
about education, stuff like that. I had to
Mhm.
do whatever I could to try to go to school. But then also there was this fear in the back of my head that like at the end of all this, what is this going to be for?
Yeah. Then
So,
what? Then you have to try to figure out how to get a job after that.
but not even that, but they can deny you your degree. So that's
Oh,
actually, I don't know if you've seen a lot of news things floating around, but there's so many stories out there where there was a guy who went to Stanford and he went through the ropes and he was like one of the head people grades wise and everything like that. What is it, like cum laude, whatever, like, and he got denied his degree at the end because of paperwork.
oh, gee.
So there's a lot of factors into this. And I really thought my whole entire freshman year, like, why am I even doing this? Like, especially when you're in freshman year and you're taking a ton of gen ed classes that are all like the BS classes that you don't even need. Uh,
Boring and yeah.
boring classes, right? Like you're like, oh yeah, I got to take this arts credit. So like in college, or like I got to take this writing class, or I have to retake calculus, whatever. And I'm like, what is this all for? I don't know. Again, let's just roll with it. Oh,
Yeah.
and so for me, the reason why the Dream Act didn't really matter in the aspect was when I started working at that establishment and that put me through college, I actually met, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but I've actually been married and divorced when I was really young.
Oh,
And a
yeah.
lot of people don't know, and I'm not like shameful of it or anything because me and my ex are actually like very amicable and we still talk and etc. But I had met at the time the person I married
Hmm.
at that job.
Yeah.
And so we got along, but he didn't know my situation either until I had to
Oh,
explain it. And that was like later on. Like he didn't know, like no one really needs to know, I
right.
guess. And it was just like flirtatious dating and stuff like, but he didn't know for at least a few months or afterward. But I did have to tell him eventually because I'm like, hey, this is why I don't drive.
Mm,
This is why my life is the way my life is because of this one factor.
yeah.
It kind of controls like everything. And like everybody else, he was floored like when he found out, but didn't stop dating me. So sure, we just and he asked me to marry him and everything was very genuine. And we're not together for other reasons that we don't have to go into in
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
podcast, but we have a great relationship now.
Awesome.
And we did even after we split and stuff. But yeah, what was crazy was we we got engaged. Like he asked me a ring and everything. It was the whole shebang. And because I was in college, I said, I don't want to plan. We'll plan like the wedding part of it, whatever. But I don't want to do the wedding part until after I graduate college, because college is stressful enough. Like
Yeah.
when you're deep in studies, and I had a full time. I was working full time and going to school full time, and it was like I had no time to do anything. So I said I don't want to do wedding planning and do really get into the nitty gritty of that
Yeah.
until after, because you all know like how big wedding planning is. And so I
Yep.
was
I
like,
just got done planning my sister's.
yeah, which I saw some of those photos and I was very impressed
Yeah.
with like the logistics of that day.
Yeah, that
So
was all me.
I didn't want to have a wedding until after college, and we weren't in any rush because we were so young. I was like 17 when I met this kid, and he was a little older by a couple years, and I was in no rush to get married, but because we were actually going to just slowly plan a wedding for it to be done when after I graduated, and then if I
Yeah.
graduated, and then we were going to have a wedding. We were just like, why don't we get married sooner? Because we wanted, this is for selfish reasons, but we were like, we want to go on a honeymoon, like out of the country, but I
Mm,
can't go out of the country because
right.
I can't come back.
Right.
I'm sure they would let me leave. I just can't come back.
Probably. But yeah, coming back in would have
um,
been a
a,
challenge.
a nightmare. And that was also, I was very feared in ever going on vacation because of that, or even traveling like locally, because you need those kind of IDs. Because you can get like a state ID, but you can't get a driver's license. So like a
Okay.
state ID, or you can have some kind of ID, or like you have your passport from your other country. You
Yeah.
can always get your passport from whatever country you're from, the embassy, or go through the embassy and do all of that.
Yeah.
So I had a Korean passport,
Yeah.
but you can always prove who you are if you're going to travel like to California. But
Yeah.
I you need it to go elsewhere. And we were talking about like where we wanted to go on our honeymoon, and obviously we couldn't go out of the country, and that was like, I was like, well, that would suck because there's so much adventure out there. Like why wouldn't we want to go out of the country?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that we actually had a really long discussion, and at 17, I think it was like 18 leading up to 19 years old, because I actually got married like when I was 19. So we went and we had this huge discussion. Why not? Let's just get the stuff started and get married, and like early, because we're already going to get married anyways, because we were
Oh
actually
yeah.
for real engaged anyways and planning a wedding as it is. And we were already living together in an apartment, which I didn't do under my name. He had to do everything
Oh
for the lease
wow.
and everything. Yeah. And put everything under his name because I couldn't be,
Yeah.
I could just be like under the lease of a tenant, but couldn't do like the background check or like the credit check or any of that. So he actually had to do all of that. And then we
Wow.
had an apartment. So he was like, why not? Let's just get the process started. And then you can, if we get our citizenship, you get your citizenship, then, or some kind of residency, then we can just go on our honeymoon, like not exactly like after the wedding, but we can still go on our honeymoon. And
Yeah.
that was like the driving factor. So we actually ran off to the Castle Rock courthouse on a random Tuesday, and we like paid $10 and got married. And
Okay.
then just to start the process, like 2 years before I graduated college.
Okay.
I was like a sophomore in college. And so then we got the whole paperwork started. So for me, then the Dream Act died for me because I
Mm,
didn't really need it anymore, because we were going to go through the process of marriage and being sponsored into the US through marriage
okay.
to get my citizenship. And which actually was funny because we started everything, and we started everything. And what a lot of people don't know is how much money it costs to do
Mm,
all of this. And I was a poor college kid,
yeah.
a very poor college kid. So
Yeah.
like, to do all this, it's thousands, and if not tens of thousands of dollars to go through the whole process. And so we started all of that, and literally every penny that we had. And luckily, like I made pretty good money for the time. We're in the recession. I made pretty good money. My husband at the time made really good money because we were just single. We had a cat. Like
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
no kids, and he was making great money for our age,
Yeah.
and we didn't have any expenses. And so we just took everything we had and we were like throwing it into this whole immigration thing. Lawyers, getting
Man.
the filing paperwork. Every time you filed, $2,000. Like really, it's
Really?
yeah, for like filing like certain applications, it's 2 grand like here, or
Ugh.
like another grand here, or like just to be able to do one. There's so many criteria too when you guys get sponsored for marriage that a lot of people don't know, is sometimes like the government requires you to have uh, what was it? They made me and my husband at the time go to an immigration like therapist or
Oh,
something, like
really?
I can't remember if they're like a psychologist or something like that. And they made them do like a whole report about this marriage is in good faith, or like that we weren't crazy. Like, so
Okay.
but it has to be through like a sponsored USCIS sponsored like psychologist or something like that.
Okay.
I forget. It can't be just be like somebody down the street.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then so that in turn, I remember like my appointment alone was like $600 for me to go to this lady. And $600 when you're like a sophomore in college is
Oh,
like a
yeah.
lot of money. There's
That's a lot of money now for a therapist.
exactly, exactly.
Oh my
I had
goodness.
to be like, here's my money. And this lady interviewed me for an hour, and then she had to write a report and submit it to USCIS and then Homeland Security, essentially. And then the same thing with my husband at the
Who
time.
was
And
already
then,
an American citizen.
but he has to go through the ropes too because he's sponsoring me, and it is 100% illegal to marry somebody for citizenship. So that's what people have to know. This is not like a joking matter, and
Yeah.
it should never be taken like a joking matter either, because a lot of people are like, oh, people joke all the time, like, I'll marry you so you can
Yeah.
stay in the country. Like, it's actually not. You will go to federal prison. Like,
Wow.
don't do that for people.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not a joking matter unless you're actually doing it for the right reasons, which
Right.
we were doing it for the right reasons because we were already planning a wedding.
Yeah.
And so we had to do that. And then there was other obstacle course. Like, in order to stay in the country, you have to get like a health screening to make sure I don't have any crazy diseases, even if I've been in the country for 20 plus years, and
Oh my God.
or like a decade and a half at that point. And so they do everything from TB, they do like a physical, like blood draw, like you name it. And so I went through, but you can't just go to any doctor. You have to go through
Mm,
a sponsored USCIS doctor. So you have to find a doctor in this website that is sponsored through this, because they're the only ones that are authorized to do the immigration paperwork for you to stay in the country.
okay.
And then, and granted, this was like 10 years, over 10 years ago. So like looking at 2008,
Yeah.
right? Over 10 years ago. So I don't even know what the process is now, but that's
Yeah.
what it was when I went through it. So again, don't come at me if the process is different now, because
Yeah.
I don't know what it is now. And I went through it in 2008-ish. So 2008, 9, 10. And so then I had to go and find this doctor, make an appointment, and it was this doctor through like health. And there's not like every doctor is okay to do this either. It's like a special contract. And then I had to pay out of pocket for all of this. And it's a week's worth of screenings, and because sometimes like things like TB, they have to prick you, you have to come back another day to get the readings,
Jeez.
etc. So it's like a lot of stuff. And then but they do everything from, obviously vaccinations are like your normal standard things, and I've had all my vaccinations from just going to school, like grade
Yeah.
school and
Sure.
stuff like that. And but obviously if you're like really new to the country, you have to get certain vaccines just to even stay in the country,
Oh,
because like
wow.
anywhere, even if you go to another foreign country, you get certain vaccines to visit other countries, right? Because
Yeah.
it's stuff that we don't have here.
Yeah. And you have to
And
prove it. The only one I've ever had to prove is yellow fever, but I have a funny story about that at some point. But yes, yellow fever is the only one I've ever had to prove that and it's usually on like islands that don't want stuff brought over from like the mainland.
right,
So
like Australia or like something like that, because they're, can you imagine like the detriment that could
yeah.
happen?
Yeah. In a
Um,
small community like that, who, maybe they don't even have hospitals. The two places that I had to do it in were the Seychelles Islands and Zanzibar off the coast of Tanzania. They both wanted, because I had also come from mainland Africa where yellow
right,
fever is running rampant.
right.
Yeah.
Um, and in order to even just stay in the country, you have to do normal vaccinations, which I already had most of them anyways, but they still test you for regular stuff like Hep B titers or et cetera, TB, even if I've been in this country for a decade and a half at
Yeah,
this
that's
point.
interesting.
It's so weird, and or 2 decades almost. And but
That
they
had
still
to
have to
be
have,
so strange to be treated. You, all you've done is live here, and
and
you're being treated like you're not from here. That had to be
um
so weird mentally and emotionally to go through.
and then so the other thing too is, because of all of this, I thought this was really weird. And so this is when, what is it? There's like an STD vaccination that came out for
The HPV or
HPV. That's what it was. I was
Mhm.
like, what was it? And it came out right around that time when I was
Mhm.
doing all the testing for all of this. And because my vaccination records didn't have HPV vaccine in it, they actually require you to get it if you need to stay in the country.
Oh wow. I don't think I ever had that one because when they first came out with it, I think they said you had to be like pre-puberty to get it. and it came out when we were in like high school. I remember there being something about not being able, and so I don't think I've ever had that one.
I just know that I am like, for working in the medical field and working with blood all day long, I have this like insane fear of needles. And I remember them being like, we do need to give you like the vaccine and it's a multi-shot vaccine. And I was like, what is this vaccine? And they were like, it's for
HPV.
HPV. And I was just like, I don't even know. I don't even know what that really was at the time. I had to do my research. And this vaccine was so new. I really had no idea what this was. And I actually had to get it to stay in the country.
Mm, wow.
So think about things like that. And granted, I didn't have any problem like just getting it,
Yeah.
but it was also weird to know that to stay in the country, you need the HPV vaccine,
Wow. A brand new vaccine that
a
just came.
brand new vaccine. So at the time, and so then I was like, yeah, that's fine, I'll do it. But I could tell you that I was not happy about getting it. It
Yeah.
also hurt. It's like it like burns like when you get like the
Oh.
vaccine. I think it's from like the preservatives or something like that.
Mhm.
So yeah, so then I had to go through all of that. So then we started the process and it was great because then I actually ended up getting, so there's like 3 steps to getting your citizenship. It's conditional permanent residency, which is like a temporary, it's not a green card, like a for sure permanent residency, but it's like a temporary thing where it's like your trial period essentially,
Okay.
to be in the US. And that's why it's conditional. And so you have to obviously during that time live like a normal, good citizen. But what's good about the conditional residency is you do get a social security number.
Okay.
So you can work in this country, pay
Mhm.
taxes, etc. So during that time, I got my conditional residency
Yay.
because we had started this process early
Okay.
on, years before we were getting married. And so I was like, this is awesome because this opened up a whole new set of doors for me because just from getting conditional residency, and this is also, you know how I say things happen for a reason. So I was actually in my senior year of college, about getting ready to graduate. And the registrar's office or wherever it was like, hey, or the bursar's office, I forget, whoever it is at CU was like, we need this documentation for you so we can get things ready for graduation. And it was like all the stuff for taxes and everything like that, financial stuff. And I didn't have it. And I've been ignoring it and putting it off all this time. And what was crazy was I got my conditional residency and my social security number. I want to say it was within the month I graduated.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So like the timing couldn't have been more perfect. So
Wow.
right. And so I was able to submit everything and submit all of that to the school. Then I was able to graduate with a degree that I just worked 4 years for.
That
Um,
alone had to be a huge win for
it
you.
was a relief.
All of the stuff we just talked about, the doors were open, right?
Right.
Like now
Right.
you could go get a driver's license. And if
Mhm.
you needed to, if you wanted to do grad school or something, you could get a loan or you could get an apartment, you could get a car, you could
I
like,
could put something in my own name.
yeah, that's
So
huge.
right. And have insurance, go to the doctor. Like
Yeah.
the only time I had been to the doctor in 10 years was like to go to that thing for Homeland Security, like for the immigration. Like that was like the only time I had ever gone to the doctor to go to the doctor.
Wow.
Um,
Lucky
so
since you didn't have that.
so that's like a temporary green card essentially. And so I got that and I really did feel like a weight was lifted off my shoulders.
Yeah.
But then during this whole time, what kind of happened that threw a wrench in all our plans was me and my husband at the time decided to separate
Mm,
because of a specific reasons, but obviously this is not the podcast for that.
sure.
And it was for the better for both of us. But that put a wrench in my immigration
Mm.
status because we were splitting up for personal reasons. And now immigration was tied in to
Oh.
everything. And we, although splitting, still loved each other.
Hmm.
And I didn't want him to get in trouble by anything, but because we were splitting up and actually had to do like divorce, like
Mm.
filing for divorce and stuff. What's so funny is I was so young that when we got married, it's funny because we talk about it now. It was almost like a breakup, just like elevated because
Yeah.
like we didn't have kids, we didn't have stuff like that. It was
Yeah.
like a breakup, except just way more elevated because now we had to file for divorce because we were married,
Mm.
technically legally married. All my immigration stuff was tied into this marriage. And
Wow.
I definitely did not want him to get in trouble. Like I said, we were parting ways, but we still loved each other. So I didn't want him to get in any kind of legal trouble for sponsoring me to stay in this country after we split.
Yeah.
But during this process, you actually have to disclose that because it's all legal stuff.
Hmm.
And then because of that, now everything got on hold. Like it was like
Oh.
on halt because then they were going to deny me my permanent residency. And like it was like crazy, like all of this. So in order for me to keep going with my immigration like journey, like paperwork and filing and all of that. And so it didn't get canceled. And in the middle of all this, we actually had to prove that our marriage was in good faith. So again, had to pay money to another therapist or whoever to do interviews saying that
I
our
was like,
marriage
how do
was
you
in good.
prove that? How do you, let me prove
Somebody
my love to the government?
you have to do these interviews separately. You don't even do them
Oh,
together. Yeah. And then for them to then they essentially they prove it by writing a report
right.
with their opinion
Yeah.
for the government is really what it is. And so hopefully their report checks out.
Right.
And so they do all that. You have to pay money, hundreds of dollars for that. Then because this is time now legal, we had to go through and all our friends and family, employers had to write affidavits
Oh, wow.
for us. Oh yeah, it was like legally the affidavits also had to be like notarized. It was crazy because when people don't, I don't know if a lot of people know what affidavits is, but it's like actually a sworn written statement,
Okay.
legal statement under like pretty much oath where it's they had to write something to Homeland Security saying like through my process like this was in good faith. This was like a real relationship. So I didn't lose my conditional residency to stay in the country because if that went away, there was no chance for me to get my permanent residency and then I'd
Oh,
be right
wow.
back to square one.
And
Yeah.
how long did it take you to, from the time you guys got married to get the conditional residency?
That was actually pretty quick because we like jumped
Okay.
on it right away with the paperwork. And if you know me, I'm a go-getter. So if
Yes.
you need me to do anything, like I will get it done.
Yeah.
I will just get it done. And so we started the paperwork right away. So it was actually pretty quick. I want to say it was within like the year that like
Okay.
everything started happening, which is actually very shocking in how slow everything works with the government because everything is done by snail mail.
Yeah.
I know that for a fact it's still like that today.
Oh, wow.
Hmm.
It's because they
And
need
so
more time to get shit done because they're so behind.
and so that was a whole nother thing. And then what's crazy is too, so it really did relieve a lot of just getting some kind of conditional residency. It relieved a lot of stress off my shoulders. And the reason was because even working all through college, I also worked, I had quit that other job that I got when I was younger in high school, but I had worked in a restaurant. And again, we had to do other methods of how I
Sure.
did a lot of odd jobs in college to make it. Like,
Oh, yeah.
do you remember like Angie's List?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I found like house cleaning jobs where they
Oh,
paid me cash and on Angie's List. And at the time it was like $15 an hour,
oh,
like
nice.
cash. So like why wouldn't I take that?
Yeah, for
I
sure.
literally I did construction cleaning. I don't even know if you know what that is.
No.
When they build like huge or just any house, they build a house, they have to have what is it called? Somebody come in and like clean like all the dust and everything off so they can do
Okay.
showings and whatever. I legit for a year smelled like cleaning solution
Oh,
because
no.
I I'm talking like I had a bandana on my head and had my hair up all the time. Like I was legit like hands and knees cleaning like
Wow.
every like these new build houses to get them ready to be on the market because back then the housing market wasn't like what it was now. And
Yeah.
so I got this odd job off like Angie's List and I was busting my butt like back breaking work. I remember and these ladies were like super nice that I worked with. They just paid me cash all the time and they would come pick me up from like my house and
Oh,
then like
wow.
take me to like where I needed to go, whatever job that we had at that day. And it was insane. One time we were doing like this house in Cherry Hills Village. It
Oh,
was like,
wow.
I want to say 15, 20,000 square foot house. It's one of
Wow.
those big mansion houses, like where Peyton Manning lives. And I was up on the ladder, like using a shot vac, like cleaning like the like the what is fireplace area. Oh my gosh, you name it. It was insane. And
Wow.
so literally backbreaking work, cleaning vents,
Oh, my
like
goodness.
duct cleaning and stuff like that. But I made $15 an hour, and literally that was a lot at the time.
Yeah.
And then I also bartended on the side and worked at a restaurant. And it was crazy because that's how I made my money to pay my tuition. I saved all my
Wow.
money. I lived so frugally back then just to make ends meet to pay like tuition
Yeah.
and stuff. And what was crazy was too, when I got my permanent or like conditional residency, I proved that I was like a resident. And this is crazy, Tawny. I showed it to the school and they set my status as like resident in Colorado, whatever. And so my tuition rates all changed to in-state tuition. And they like refunded me back the whole
Oh,
last semester or a year or something like that. So like it was insane. Like
oh,
all the chain of
wow.
events that kind of happened just from getting like a social security number.
Wow. That one seemingly simple thing.
And
That
it was like
card with all
crazy.
the numbers on it.
Exactly. And so then it was crazy because like I said, that card came like the month before I graduated. Then I got all my financial stuff in order with the school because I almost didn't graduate because of these things. And
Mhm.
then all within, let's see, I'm trying to remember all of what happened. It's crazy because then my marriage was like disintegrating and then all of this was going to be taken away. So then I was like very feared again. Like I was back to, I
Oh,
had a lot of anxiety. Like
I'm sure. Yeah.
I'm already a very anxious person. Like my husband can attest to this, but I had severe anxiety at that time. Like I swear to God, if I was able to, should have gone to talk to a therapist to get some kind of anti-anxiety medication at some point because I felt like I needed it because some
Mhm.
nights I just couldn't sleep through. I had like insomnia because I was so afraid of losing everything that I now had.
Yeah, sure.
And especially now with like me and my ex splitting, like where am I gonna live? Where am I gonna like it? I had so much stuff like running through my head
And you're
at that
back
point.
to being
Square one.
unsure about everything again
Exactly. And so
and what the future.
yeah. And what was crazy was after we split and then we had to do all like I'm talking like 20 plus people had to do affidavits for us, legal documents. I had to hire a lawyer, not for the divorce or anything like that, like for immigrate another lawyer for this whole immigration stuff to help us. Because now no longer was it easy now where you can just now we knew we were getting married before we can file all the paperwork ourselves. It was not like that at all. Now it got into such crazy territory that I needed help because I couldn't do the paperwork
Yeah,
and all of that, or even understand the legal mumbo jumbo of it
right.
all.
Yeah.
So I had to hire a legal attorney for immigration, specializing in immigration at the time. And she's actually not the person that I used when I became a citizen, but like at the time, that was like the only person I can afford. So
Because lawyers
lawyers,
are not cheap.
not at all. They're like hundreds of dollars an hour.
Yeah.
And then when they like file things for you, it's thousands of dollars, like on
Yeah.
top of the fees you pay to the United States. So I had I know for a fact just in like that 1 year, I think I spent over $10,000 just in 1 year. Like one of the last years that we were doing this. I know it was at least $10,000.
Wow.
And I'm talking affidavits from like his mother and like my family, his grandmother, his family members, his employer, like
Wow.
my closest friends, my employer, you name it, like anybody and anybody who had some kind of direct relationship to us.
Yeah.
And so we had to go through that. I had to hire this lawyer and they really helped me through a lot of these things because then I was able to actually get my permanent residency during all of this, even with us getting divorced because I had a very good lawyer.
Oh, good.
Um, yeah, but again, the fight is always not over because you're not a citizen. Because when
Right.
you're even if you're just a any kind of resident to the US, you have to constantly, or like a visa holder, you have to constantly renew it to stay in this country and be legal in this country.
And how often
And
does that happen?
and it depends on what you have. So like
Okay.
with a permanent green card, the one I got was like a 10-year green card,
Okay.
which was great because I had kind of 10 years to figure out my life now. Like it's like a
Yeah.
decade of just being like, oh, whew, I can figure this out, you
After
know?
everything you just went through in just a short time span. Yeah. How
Right.
old were you when you got the permanent residency?
I don't know the exact year, but it was after we divorced and it was after I was 21 or 20, 21 or
Okay.
22. So it
Early
was
20s.
after early 20s. I just know that. I just don't know the exact year and all the timelines. I would actually have to go back into like my immigration filing cabinet and pull it. I actually still to this day, because even if I am a citizen now, to this day, I have this weird thing in the back of my head where I'm like still fearful of some of these things because I
Sure.
wasn't a natural born citizen here. I legit in my office have a filing cabinet and it has multiple files and it's called like immigration
Yeah.
and it has everything from the time I ever started from even talking to that lawyer in high school.
Wow.
Um, um, I had to, if I have to remember, it was like in my early 20s, I got permanent residency. Then I really felt like the biggest relief because that was like a decade. I have a decade to like figure it out.
What
But
are you,
I was,
what more do you, okay, so you get more time with the
you get
permanent
time,
residency, but
right?
what else is different from that versus the
You
condition?
can actually apply to become a citizen.
Okay. But like as far
So,
as rights go and like your social security and like
oh,
all of
so
that, everything is the same?
everything is essentially the
Okay.
same. The only difference is like when you have some kind of conditional residency of any sort in this country, like you can do everything as like a citizen except for like vote
Okay.
and yeah, things like that. But you can still get a job, like you can live in this country like you belong here.
Okay.
But you just can't like do all the other, you can essentially vote. You can't like vote.
That's a big one. So you didn't even vote until you were in your 30s?
Mhm. My yeah, and it
Wow.
was funny because the last election is when I got to vote for the first time, and I absolutely
Really?
hated the election that I voted
Oh,
for for the first
yeah.
time in my life. I was like really hoping, I was like, why couldn't it have been like this election or this election? I actually follow certain politics, so like I was, and I get pretty hot about certain things, and especially things about women's rights. And I was like, of course, this is the election I get to vote in. Ugh. I feel like it's
Yeah.
not just me that felt that way in the US. I feel like all of
No.
the US
To
is
be
kind of like
fair, I don't know that I was excited about too many of the previous elections in general. You just gotta, a lot of it is
right.
picking the better of two evils, but
Yeah, it's just funny. So like I said, I'm not going to get into politics on this
yeah.
podcast, but
But
I
voting is a
remember
huge right to have
right, and
not been able to do when you grew up here, and a lot of that stuff was affecting you too.
it's directly affecting how I live my life. And so
Yeah.
it's same thing with women's rights. Like, why do we vote? Because it directly affects you.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
100. And now that I have a daughter, it directly affects my daughter.
Yeah.
So it's for the future of our
Yeah.
generation.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's why you have to vote. And I know it's really funny, Tawny. I'll tell you a funny story. In high school, was it Mr. Stebbins? He had government class. I think
Old
it was Mr.
Stebbins, because there was
Yes,
old
old
Stebbins
Stebbins.
and young Stebbins. I had
Old
young
Stebbins.
Stebbins in
Math,
for
right? Was it math?
English.
Oh, was it
English.
English? Okay. Yeah,
Mhm.
but I had old Stebbins for government class. And the first day of government class, he gave us like a pre-quiz to see what everybody knew, like our knowledge base in government class. And the test was the US citizenship test. And
Oh
I had the
no.
highest score in our class,
Oh.
which was ironic, like
Oh my gosh.
on that pre-test thing. Yeah. So
Wow.
the irony of this is hilarious because the
Yes.
one undocumented person
In the room.
knew the most about, yeah, but it was just funny because I thought I didn't even know that much stuff, especially because it's like, are you smarter than a fifth grader? Like you have to really think back on things you had learned in grade school.
Yeah.
um and I like could not remember a lot of things, like things about Declaration of Independence and like all these things you
Yeah.
learn when you're like in the fifth grade. And so I had to really jog my memory for this pre-test. Like just like who's
Wow.
the first president,
Yeah.
like and
Yeah.
so like, but they ask what do the stars mean on the flag, what like they ask about like the executive branch, all that kind of stuff in government class.
Interesting.
It's really funny because that was the pre-test to government class in old Mr. Stebbins class.
That's hilarious. Wow.
Yeah, and but nobody knew I was undocumented in the class. And so the other thing too is finally when I do consider myself like one of the lucky ones because after 27 years of being in this country, after when I was older and during this permanent residency time, I also went through a really weird time during that permanent residency period because I was filing for my citizenship. Yeah. So I got another lawyer, and it's for anybody listening to this podcast, I will 100% recommend my lawyer. She's
Great.
one of the best, top 40, under 40, like when it comes to this matter. And she doesn't just do immigration, she does like family law and stuff like that. Again, you get what you pay for. Okay. And so lawyers are obviously never cheap, right?
Yep.
But I went to her, I know her from like a friend of a friend, and I could I went to her for help to get my citizenship paperwork squared away because it was all this paperwork is very difficult. And so for the common man to really just do all this paperwork is incredibly hard because if you mess it up and
Mm.
you pay $2,000 to file it, guess what?
Oh,
You have to do
wow.
it again. And
Uh,
so you want to make sure you have the legal team behind you to make sure all your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed because you
yeah.
don't want to have to do it multiple times.
Yeah.
And what's also really important during this whole conditional residency to citizenship is everything is done through snail mail. And a lot of during those periods, besides medical and whatever, you have to do like fingerprinting, the biometrics appointments, and they come through snail mail.
Oh,
Like
wow.
they literally send you a piece of paper that says, and it's funny because I always used to run to the mailbox every day to check to see if I got something from USCIS
Yeah.
because that was really important. Everything is done through snail mail. And you'll get this piece of paper that's, hey, like you have to show up at this location because there's not a lot of locations to get. It's like the DMV. There's only so many locations that you can. This is not a hot thought out thing. Like you got to go to this one location that's very far at this exact time, and it will say something like 10:40 is your appointment, or like
Oh, wow.
10:35. It's like very specific. And they usually only give you like a 3 week or 2 week notice. So also I am so lucky I have the job that I do because they were so forgiving in
Mm,
having to adjust my schedule 50,000 times for all these appointments, because I would get
wow.
like a piece of mail at the house that was like, hey, you have to go for this fingerprinting appointment on next Tuesday. And it would only
Wow.
come 2 weeks before that or something like
Right.
that. And if I didn't check the mail for a few days, then I'd be already a few days behind from when they sent it. And then it'd be
Ugh.
like, you have to show up for this appointment at this time. And then they would say, you have to show up at this time to check in, whatever, and you can't miss it. If you do not show up, then you have to start your application process all over again. Or you have to, if you want to like reschedule, you have to write a letter back to this address.
Oh my gosh.
It's the word really is, it's stupid, because
Right.
in our day and age where
Of
technology is
technology.
so readily available, and this is back in 10 plus, right?
Not
So
that
like
long ago.
not
Yeah.
even that long ago. And that's still when I had like online banking on my phone. So like why
Yeah.
can't we set an appointment for things or reschedule online? It makes no sense whatsoever. But it's also, they probably do that to make it harder process. Everything's done through snail mail. And you better hope that USPS does not lose something really important, because
Yeah. You probably don't want to move much in that time frame.
no, at all, not at all. Especially when you're going through this process, you don't
Yeah.
want to move at all because they send everything to your address. I didn't move for a very long time,
Yeah.
and they do all that. And my job was so forgiving in letting me be off to make these appointments and etc. And I remember I went through this really weird time though, because my green card, I had applied for my citizenship at least a year and a half to 2 years before it expired.
Mhm. But it took
Um,
you that long to build it all up, right?
yes, like
Like
to get all my
of
paperwork
those,
ready.
that's that 10-year time frame, right?
Um, uh, I essentially took almost like the whole 10 years, because then I was like, my next step
Right.
is to become a citizen.
Mhm.
But I did it so much earlier on than most people, because if you know anything about me, I'm extremely proactive.
Yeah.
I don't let anything like, I'm, I don't let things like assignments lapse. Like I am all
Yeah.
about the due date and etc. And sorry, my
Okay.
husband was texting me. And so then, so when that happened, I went through all the paperwork process at least a couple years earlier, because I was too afraid to let my residency lapse, because then I would be in bigger trouble to stay in this
Hmm.
country. So as like the responsible party, I hired a lawyer, I got all my paperwork in order, I paid all the fees, thousands of dollars, for them to file everything. And this was like also what was crazy. My paperwork, somehow there's multiple locations in Colorado where they do the processing of the file that you like submit for it. And I was not hearing anything back for so long. And you can go online and check your status, but it was just like pending. Like nothing
Oh,
was moving. And it had been like a year. And I'm like, and it does take months, like a
yeah.
long time. So it's not unusual that it would do that. And but then I was starting to get really worried, because then I was down to like the last year of my residency, and I was like, okay, I really haven't heard anything back and whatever. And but then it was also because it was like an election year. And
Mhm.
just to let everybody know, and people might say it doesn't matter, but it really does matter when things are, it's an election year. Things like immigration is an extremely hot topic. So
Yeah.
things actually take a lot longer than you anticipate. And I did my due diligence by doing things early, but because things were taking a long time. And what I actually found out later on during this whole process was because my lawyer was like getting involved in trying to figure out like why it was taking so long. Um, they looked into it, and somehow my application got lost in this one office, and they had to transfer it. Somehow then they found
Oh
it, they
my
had to transfer it to another
gosh.
one. It was like a whole like year situation of why my progress on that website was just like not moving. Like the bar was just like on the first like bar
Oh,
saying that like they received it, and then nothing. So they actually had to go through and find my paperwork.
oh wow.
Yeah, afterward. And that took, and anything about the government, that also takes a long time.
Everything takes a long time with
And
them.
it
Yeah.
has to be, everything has to be done by written request too. It's
Yeah.
not like you just can call somebody and be like, hey, like you're on hold with customer service. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Along all that, eventually, yes, they all found everything. But there was a weird time because they didn't do it in time, but I also couldn't renew my residency because I was in the process of filing my citizenship. It was really weird. And so my
Oh
permanent residency actually was lapsed during that time. So for a certain period in this year, it wasn't a
my
long
gosh,
period, but
that's so
so I was,
stressful.
it was very weird because I was a permanent resident, but not yet a citizen. But I couldn't renew my permanent residency, but I couldn't become a citizen. It was really weird. I was in this like weird limbo
Yeah.
phase because
And
I had
again,
no,
terrifying again, right
but
back to where you were being unsure again.
exactly. But the only good news about where I was during that time, like my only saving grace was like I had a job. I had I owned my own home. Etc. Things like that. I had a bank account. Like my life was just normal. It's just that I didn't have any resident status in the US. It was very bizarre because I was like in really what it was, I was in limbo.
Wow.
And I had started it way years earlier than what
Yeah.
some people like back in the day, they used to start this process only 6 months before your permanent residency expired.
Oh,
But
wow.
yeah, but because like elections and immigration was such a hot topic and them losing my application, then finding my application and all of that in between. So that took like almost 2 years. And then because it lapsed, I was in this weird limbo period. I was nothing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it was
For how
it was kind
long?
of it was I want to say it was less than a year.
Okay, that's good. But
but
still.
but still it was very stressful because I was just always, is this going to happen? Because if I don't become a citizen, I have to retry to get my permanent residency, but I'm expired on my old resident
Oh
card.
my
So I
gosh.
was that was the part I was actually most stressed about.
Yeah, for
You
sure.
know, talking with my
Extremely
lawyer,
unsettling.
but because we had already turned in everything for my citizenship, I had to actually wait it out,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But then what was crazy was, this is also bizarre, how things always happen like this. I actually got the notice in the mail saying that you are eligible to swear in to become a citizen. So this was like the final hurrah step of this whole journey, except it came at like the worst timing because I had planned. So my now husband, we were dating at the time. I had planned a secret trip for the both of us to London for 10 days and like a week and a half. Like he didn't know where we were going, what we were doing. Like I had booked all our plane tickets and like our agenda, and it was going to be a huge surprise for him. This was like September 2017, I want to say.
Okay.
And I had been planning this trip for a year at this point to surprise my boyfriend at the time. And he knew we were going somewhere. He just had no idea where. Like
Yeah.
it was going to be somewhere. And then I got that notice in the mail, again, snail mail. I got this letter
Right.
in the mail saying you're eligible to become a US citizen 10 days before we left on this trip.
Oh my
Okay. So
gosh.
like people would think, oh, that's great. Like you're going to be a citizen. And I was already able to freely move in and out of the country now because I was a permanent resident. But
Yeah.
no, it wasn't great timing because what happens is when you swear in, and again, you cannot reschedule this like swearing in ceremony thing. Like when you
Right.
get called, essentially when you get called for it, you get called for it. You're
You
going to
have to
become
go.
a citizen on this date. Yeah, you have to
Yeah.
go. You have to become a citizen on this date, unless you
Okay.
want to write a letter to try to change this appointment.
Oh
Like
my gosh.
yeah. And so
Uh,
and I actually was one of the lucky ones because I actually got to go to the courthouse in Aurora and do the whole like swearing in thing, and it was me and like 100 other people, and it was crazy because they had people like raise your hand if you're from this country and
oh,
whatever. There was
cool.
like 50 different nationalities there. It was like
Wow.
insane. Yeah. And like I actually got to do a real like swearing in ceremony, which was super cool. But the only not cool part was they actually your passport. So like I was a permanent resident to the US. I could freely travel with my Korean passport. So you get
Okay.
stamped like on my Korean passport, just like you would on your US passport. And then all you need to come back into your country is like your permanent resident card and your
Okay.
passport to show that you're still a citizen somewhere else, but you're a permanent resident to the US. And
Okay.
so I you have to forego your passport, your
Oh, I
national,
have heard that. Yeah.
yeah, you're not. So it is no now null and void. My Korean passport is null and void, and I'm leaving the country in 10 days.
And you had everything
Yeah,
linked to that passport, I'm sure. Like,
exactly. Like, and so
oh no.
I was like beyond stressed because I had just planned this amazing trip for me and my now husband, and I was like, oh my God, he's good. I'm gonna have to send him on this trip without me.
Oh no.
Yeah, and the worst part was it happened like our trip was around Labor Day, so like we had that Labor Day holiday in that time in September. So I didn't even have 10 business days to get this situated. I had 10 days until we left on
Wow.
our trip.
Yeah.
And obviously a passport office is like the DMV. They're closed during holidays. Also, I don't know if you guys know this, they're closed a lot. Like they're like they're not open like Monday through Friday, like 8 to 5. Like they might actually be working, but they're not actually open to the public.
Oh,
Like they
wow.
only work till like noon at a certain point, and then like they close for like processing at the end of the day or
How's
like
anybody
certain days
supposed to
on
get
like
anything
Thursday.
done?
Yeah, I know. And so like I was so stressed because I was like, oh my God, I have the certificate saying I'm a citizen now, whatever I swore on, but now I don't have a passport to leave this country. And so in these 10 days, I think it was only like 5 regular business days or something like that during that time. And 5 business days, I had to figure out how to get a passport. Like,
Wow.
and again, circling back, I'm so lucky I have the job that I did to be as flexible as I was because
Yeah.
I had to be like, I'm not going to show up to work this entire morning because I have to go to the passport office to
Oh,
go get this
wow.
handled and like all of this stuff. Yeah. So I got it done. I had to pay all the extra money to have an expedited passport, etc. But it literally came. I was able to go pick it up like 2 days before we left on our trip. Yeah.
Did you have to call the airlines and everything too, or?
I think I got it like handled through like the ticket office at the time, but I
Okay.
was more stressed that I couldn't leave or come back into the country.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if you don't have a valid passport, they don't let you leave either. I don't know if you guys know.
Oh, yeah. They
Yeah,
do a lot of the countries depending on where you're going. Yeah, you have usually
yeah.
get checked
And
for
then they also check
international
when it
flights.
expires because if your
Yeah.
your like return is like before it expires, they won't let you go because then you're gonna be stranded somewhere.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so like I was very stressed to say the least during this time. But I tell you what, after I got my citizenship and then I got so August 17th, 2017 is when I swore in and got my citizenship. Yeah,
Yay.
so that was like amazing as it is. And so it's like the beginning of the rest of my life because
Yeah.
I don't know how else to put it except I don't really have to worry about it any longer.
How does that feel?
Oh, like so
Weird.
relieving. Like weird because it's like something that I worked for a decade and a half and then now it's not something that's not even in my brain on an everyday
Right.
basis. Like I don't even think about it like at all.
Yeah. Oh my
So
gosh.
it's crazy because I feel like I know you've said this in like your other podcast stuff too, but I just feel like things happen for a reason in a specific order. Like if XYZ didn't happen, something wouldn't have happened for me down the line, right? And
Yeah.
so, and it's more crazy that things happen at certain times. Really, I got my conditional residency right before I graduated college and I was able to
Yeah.
get my degree or what timing of everything,
And
things
how,
like
like,
that.
even though the London trip was stressful, that was the first time you got to travel on your US passport too.
It
So,
was. It was actually like the first stamp on my first U.S. passport because now
yay.
I've changed my name since then, so
Oh,
I've
sure.
gotten another passport.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that was my first U.S. passport, and that was the first stamp on my U.S. passport was that trip to London. And I could
Um,
tell you what, that was like what there's also like very memorable trips out there. And I've had some amazing trips in my lifetime, but that was also one that was extremely memorable for the fact that I knew I could leave the country, come back in. I wasn't stressed. I was also celebrating like a citizen to the US, although this was more like a surprise for my boyfriend at the time.
it was
And
also
so
a self-gift.
exactly. But I didn't know. And I'm just glad that they like didn't say, you know what, actually I was very stressed about too when I was planning that trip was I was hoping that I didn't get the letter saying that, oh, you're gonna become a citizen and swear in. And it was while I was gone.
While you were gone. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
because
so
that is
that
the thing.
didn't happen. So that was
Yeah,
good.
that was really good. It literally happened like the month before our trip, or like technically 10 days before our trip. So yeah, in August. So it was like insane because I was like, oh my God, I was like really stressed out about
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah. But everything always like everything somehow worked out. And granted, like I say, I'm one of the lucky ones because this does not happen for everybody.
Yeah.
Because you can go your whole life and you can do the right things and hire the right people and live your life and it can still not work out for you when it
Mm,
comes to your immigration status in this country just because of a technicality or just because they deny you for whatever XYZ reasons and they may never even tell you why they deny your applications. That's why it's so important that when my biggest advice for anybody really going through anything like this, and I'm not saying being sponsored through marriage, I'm talking just becoming a citizen in the US,
right.
although you can do your paperwork on your own, I just think it's wise to hire somebody like a lawyer to help you through it. It's worth the money to do it right the first time. So it's so it can just run. smoothly.
But the reality of that too is that like we talked about, not a lot of immigrants have those means
Cash flow. Yeah.
too. Yeah. I think there's a misconception too at the fact that this is an easy process and that we're just letting people in willy-nilly. And while there are people coming over when they shouldn't be and whatever, I won't deny that. I think it's everyone I've talked to that has tried to do it the right way and the correct way, it has been hell and difficult.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's not easy. If you
Right.
and
So
probably that's the reason why a lot of people just don't do it.
it is because also to think about it, if you are really a foreigner to this country, and I will give an example. If you come to this country from Mexico, you cross the border, you don't even know English. Like, where do you go from there? How do you manage to get, how do you even figure out the means to talk to the right people to help you? Like, it is a thing. Um, and when I talk about like my parents and their visa, there was like a two-part to this too. Yes, it was wrong for them to not leave the country when they had to, but they were doing it because Korea's economy was not great at that time. So they were really doing it in the best interest for me, really,
Yeah,
essentially to try to give me the best life possible in their life on the line to give me the best life possible. What was crazy too is when my parents were going through this in New York City, because I think back in the day, I might have a part of this story a little incorrect, but I'm gonna try to do my best, like piece it together. But I do know there was a whole thing where my parents did try to get their citizenship back when we were living in New York. But I feel like, from what I've heard in the past, and if this is so wrong, I'm sure my mother will correct me, that I think my parents hired a lawyer that they could afford at the time. And mind you, they were immigrant
okay.
workers working labor jobs. They made almost no money.
Right.
They hired who they could afford. And I believe that person, that lawyer was crooked because he had taken I think it was like all of their original paperwork when they came to the country or something, which kind of devastated them to do this process later on because they didn't have the I-90s and everything, the
Oh,
actual
yeah.
paperwork from when they came to the country. Because I think the lawyer at the time the only lawyer they could afford, had run off with their originals of their
Wow.
paperwork. So it made it hard for them actually to do whatever process they wanted to do in the future,
Sure.
like
Yeah.
down the line. And I don't even think they tried for like years anyways, because
Yeah.
they didn't have the means to do it. Because that was all their eggs in one basket. Like they
Mhm.
paid someone and trusted someone, and then this person fell off the face of the earth,
Wow.
and in turn screwed them in the process too. So that's actually why it was harder for them to try to do this paperwork before I was even in high school.
Wow.
So I remember that was like there was something along those lines that made it harder for them.
Oh,
But what luck, like you're already struggling in this country, and then somebody just ran off with all your money.
oh, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah. And it's granted, I didn't go through that personally, but like my parents had to go through that. And
Yeah, and you
like I
can have
said,
empathy for that for sure.
and all of this was because they wanted to give us a better life,
Mm. And
the
I think that's
American dream.
right. And I think that's something to keep in mind for people out there listening that like people come here because it's a great country and there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of wealth and a lot of,
There's a
again,
lot of
yeah.
resources in this country. Yeah.
And there are bad seeds out there in any group of people you're talking about, like 100%. I'm not going to sit here and say it's all perfect, but I think the majority of people coming here just want a better life for their
Hmm.
kids, for
Their offspring, like,
yeah, for
yeah,
the
their next
future.
generation.
I've actually, while traveling, I've met a lot of people, specifically in Central and South America, that mostly Central America, that came over here for a year, 2 years, worked, went back, made a bunch of money because they could make
Hmm.
so much more money here.
I worked with a lot of
Back.
people like that when I was my first job that I got here. There was this really nice old guy who worked in the kitchen, and he was so lovely. But he actually worked in the US, and he had his like permanent resident card and stuff. So he actually went back and forth from Mexico, but he specifically worked here, and his entire family was in Mexico on the farm, and he worked here at minimum wage, which was more than what he was making in back home, and he would just send all his money back so his
Yep.
wife can raise their kids
Yep.
and for to have a better life.
Yeah. Yeah. So we had a guy from Mexico working for us at the restaurant in the kitchen, and he worked for us in the kitchen, and he worked
All the time.
all the
I
hours we
kid you
would give
not.
him.
This
Yes.
this guy
And
literally worked
then,
like 7 days a week.
yeah.
And not even just this job,
Yeah.
another
Okay. So
job.
that's, yeah. So
Yeah.
this guy also worked for like a landscaping a golf course. Okay. Also very hard manual labor. And then he might have even had a third job. I don't know.
Hmm.
I don't know the details of his citizenship just because my in-laws
Not
were the
something,
ones checking the documents, not me.
right,
But
right.
he was legit as far as I know. But he was doing that exact same thing. He'd been here, I think he's still here for 10 years and maybe even longer. And he was just sending all of his money back to Mexico to his wife and his kids, and so that they could have a better life.
Or they can go to college or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they were
Better
doing that because they
opportunities.
they wanted a better life for their family. And it was
Yeah.
much more money than he could have made back home.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And it's not, it's funny too, because when you talk to these people, they're not living extravagant lifestyles back in their country.
No, no.
They're living in poverty.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
But
if
to
you
make
were,
the money in their own country is
it's
nothing.
so much harder. It's so
It's
much harder. Yeah.
nothing. Yeah.
And I remember like he was such a good dear friend to me because I remember he would come back from Mexico and he would bring back like chilies from Mexico and he would cook for us in the back. He'd be like, try this. I just brought this back or something like that. Like he was like such a nice man. He was, I think he was in his 40s at the time. So he's much older now, obviously, because that's been 20 years. And at 40, he was busting his butt 7 days a week, working. He was like busting tables at another restaurant, working the day shift at this other place. Like
Yeah.
he was washing dishes somewhere else. Like it was crazy, like how much this man worked seven
Yeah.
days a week.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. When that's what they're here to do in those situations, like they're just here to try to work and send it home and hopefully eventually be able to go home to their
And
families.
and actually, I have a really crazy story for you too. Back circling back to high school and not having like health insurance and stuff like that. When my dad was in Colorado for a short period of time, I remember this. I had gone to work at this place that hired me, and I was feeling so much pain. And I had never felt like this in my life. And I didn't know what it was at the time. And I was like keeled over at work, like holding my side. And I was like, do I have a kidney stone? I had no idea what was wrong with me, but because I didn't have a doctor to go to or whatever. I finally at work they were like, you need to call your parents. I was keeled over like on the table like this, just like trying to like even talk to people.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and I was like holding my side in excruciating pain. And they called my dad because they were like, you need to come get her. Like she refuses to leave work and she's like in a lot of pain. And my dad actually took me to the nearest urgent care, and I know he paid out of pocket for that,
Oh,
for
wow.
them to see me. And all it was, I think I have a UTI or something. I have no idea. I think it was something like that, but I needed antibiotics.
Okay.
Okay, but I didn't have insurance either.
Oh,
And they told my dad and me had to like explain to the doctor at the urgent care that I didn't have medical insurance or anything. So like medications would be so much more like if they had to file a medication through like King Supers or something like
ugh.
that. But I needed 10 days worth of like antibiotics. And the doctor actually went to the back. And you know how when like pharmaceutical reps drop off samples for
Yeah. Yeah.
medication? He gave me those 10 days worth of that
Oh,
medication in those
wow.
samples. And that is what got me through. And I got better
Oh,
because I
that's
couldn't afford to go get antibiotics. Simple
wow.
antibiotics that like usually cost you nothing or like $4, like with medical insurance. And I remember this vividly. I think I was like a junior in high school. Yeah. And so my dad had to
Wow.
come get me from work. Yeah, because I was like 16. And then we had to explain to the physician there. And then they're like, wait, I have an idea. And this physician went to the back, got samples, and brought it out.
Wow. Just
Just
the
so I could get
kindness of
care.
people. I love that.
Yeah. So I was like I said, things happen for a reason. Who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe if I didn't see that physician, this could have ended differently for me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So
So
many things.
like so many things you don't think about when you're just born
Yeah.
into this country because it's
Yeah.
just your normal way of life.
Yeah. Yeah. And we
If I just,
definitely take a lot of that for granted.
mhm. So yeah, but if you have any other questions for me, that's pretty much my entire story. But now I do have my citizenship, and that's something that is literally on the back burner for me. So that's why I haven't really been keeping up with Dream Act or things like that a lot, DACA and stuff like that. I read about it, but I'm not like actively like following it anymore because it's sucky to say, but it's no longer applicable
Sure. Yeah.
to me, even if it was such a huge part of my life.
Yeah.
The whole half of front part of my life was that.
And there's probably a part of you that is like happy to leave that chapter behind too, because it was so stressful and so tumultuous. Like you didn't know what was going on. And yeah, so it's probably nice you deserve that peace.
I can tell you I for sure have peace.
Good.
Yeah. But
Thank you
that's
so
it.
much for sharing all of that. I hope that this is super eye-opening for people and anybody listening learned some things. I know I've got some international listeners as well, so it might be interesting to learn about the US citizenship process too.
If anybody ever does need a good person, like not a crooked lawyer, like a really good lawyer to help you through these things, I can give you the name to that person and I will be happy to refer you so you can get some help yourself for
Yeah,
anybody listening, really.
I'll link your contact info in the show notes. And then if anybody wants to reach out to Cookie, you can click on her information in the show notes. But do you have any final parting words?
Keep doing what you're doing. I love your podcast and it's
Thank
great.
you.
And I think you are actually helping a lot of people through just their different stories. So
Yeah,
I'm
thank you.
appreciative that you even gave me the opportunity to come up on your podcast, which I would have never thought, A, in high school that you would have a podcast, and two, I'd be on your podcast.
Oh, I'm very grateful that you came on and were so vulnerable and open to sharing that story because I know that stuff's not easy to talk about, especially if it's a tough part of your life too. So thank you so much. And
Absolutely.
thank you everybody for listening. And I don't know, Cookie and I talked about maybe trying to do another one because she's got a couple other topics that I think would be fantastic. So we'll probably see her on here again. Wow. Okay. But yeah, thanks for listening and we'll see you on the next episode.